guest was actually recommended to us by the Chief of Prisons from the Idaho Department of Corrections, Chad Page, who was actually a previous Captivating Conversation guest earlier this year. So check that out if you'd like to hear from his perspective. Please welcome Joseph Pratt.
Thank you.
So, Joe is a recently returned citizen who spent 32 years of a life sentence in the Idaho Department of Corrections for murder in the first degree. He was paroled last year, and I met Joe actually in 2017 at ISCI while working on an exhibit about prison hobby crafts, and I was impressed and still am impressed by your woodworking skills. We still have a few of your items, a jewelry box in our collection, your wallets, those intricate little wallets that you were making. Yeah. So fascinating. And also, we interviewed you several times just talking about hobby crafts, but you were so open about just everything about your life at the institution. And so, Joe here was active in several programs at the Idaho Department of Corrections, including addictions recovery and living skills education, cognitive restructuring classes, and process groups, Alcohol Anonymous, Correctional Industries, and served as a mentor and facilitator in several life skills-based programs at the institution. So thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little about yourself, about your childhood, your education, and how you made it to Idaho?
Yeah. So I was born in Michigan and thought that I was in a normal family and growing up, and then my parents divorced when I was 9, moved to town with my sister and my mom. Grades, of course, plummeted, and started fighting and having a lot of issues, and so then moved to a bigger city, Battle Creek, Michigan. A lot more exposure to alcohol, drugs in school. So pretty much found my way around the wrong side of the street.
Gotcha.
And so then probably 16, 17 years old, my brothers were coming to Idaho. Had come out here, went way up north. Told all kinds of great stories about how beautiful it was, and so a year or two later, I think it's 1978 or 79 or something, I came out with them and got the bug, and like a magnet kept drawing me back no matter where I went, and eventually ended up having a wife and 2 kids up north. Which I was not prepared for that, and that didn't turn out well. And so, without putting anything on my ex-wife, I found out that if you line up 10 women, I'll pick the sickest one out of the bunch. And she proved that to be true. So I just dove further and further into drugs and alcohol, and ended up back down in Colorado again. Geographical escapes, all of this stuff that's pretty classic in drug addiction and substance abuse. And so I don't know how far or what you want to get into with all of that. Ended up coming back up here and leading into the crimes that I committed, I guess. And one of the things that I'd like to preface before I get too far into that is that as wonderful as this is, there are still people that would prefer me not to be able to be out here doing this. Mm-hmm. And there are several victims of my crimes that are still suffering because of my actions. And so I don't want to leave that out.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to talk about me and my life and forget about the fact that I caused a lot of damage to a lot of people. So as wonderful as this is, there's still people that are suffering because of my behavior, actions. And so needless to say, I was working when I was in North Idaho, working for a person that was in an illegal enterprise, somehow have a knack for meeting all the wrong people. And so I went to collect a debt, and somehow Idaho calls that burglary, robbery, and kidnapping, and all those other crimes. And so that debt collection, if you will, was really just going and robbing a previous employer. And so that went way south in a hurry.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I don't know if I answered your question, but you
I
probably
think
have
you
to reel me in a little bit because rabbit trails are everywhere.
No, yeah. I mean, you have a unique perspective, spending as long as you did at the institution and seeing just the evolution of IDOC over a 30-year period, and then coming back out and, you know, seeing so many changes within society. So that's talking about the struggles of being a returning citizen. Like that's what we want to really know about. And but
Yeah.
do you remember? So do you want to talk about the crime itself? Anything you want to talk about
I'm as transparent as they
Yeah.
come. I'll talk
Okay.
about whatever. What I don't want to have happen is I know that this is going to be broadcast, and so I want to be really careful about causing
right?
any reoccurring damage to people.
Yeah, that's totally
That's where it
valid.
would be.
Yeah,
Not to glorify any of the crimes or the event, you know, whatever all of that stuff was that took place.
yeah.
Just want to really be careful about that when I do speak about it.
Yeah. Did drugs and alcohol take a part in that?
Well, the lifestyle that I lived was all about drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
And so whether I was under the influence at the time or not was really pretty irrelevant in the sense I was not under the influence, but you know, if you use for 20 years and then don't use for a week, you're not really not using.
Yeah.
You know, so the whole lifestyle is to me it would be easy to say that drugs and alcohol influence the behavior,
Yeah.
but that's not really the case. If you know, I suffer from a criminal personality disorder, and so I have distorted beliefs that lead me to believe you know, the way that I want to.
Yeah.
It's selfish and self-centered. And so to answer the question about, you know, if I was under the influence or not under the influence, I was not high at the time, but you can't say that I was in a right mind
Right.
by any means. And so
Yeah. Oh man.
it's a sticky subject where I come from
Yeah.
as far as whether or not you were under the influence or not. I don't think it really would have mattered much. You know, as a criminal, you do that whether you're loaded or not loaded.
Right.
And so
And addiction is a lifelong struggle. Do you still feel any lingering, you know?
unfortunately, I want to be real funny about Mountain Dew and Hershey's bars, but
Right.
my name's Joe and I'm addicted to ice cream.
Yeah.
I struggle with the word struggle because I listen to a lot of people in the treatment field that they say that they're struggling with something when they're not really putting out any effort.
Yeah.
So it's not really a struggle. Being sober to me is not a struggle. It's, you know, I have 29 years of sobriety, and I would say that probably the first, you know, 5 or 10 or whatever, there may have been struggles there. You know, today, you know, the issues are not drinking or using. You start getting into character defects and you start dealing with, you know, emotions. You know, it used to be I only had to deal with 2 emotions, was fear and anger. And now, you know, there's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, why am I feeling sad? And unfortunately, when you go through a cognitive self-change program, you spend a lot of time thinking and breaking down why you're thinking the way you're thinking and what belief is being driven by that. And so, yeah, it can be a lot of rabbit trails.
Yeah. Going all the way back, what was the intake process like? And were you shown the ropes? Did you have a mentor your first, month in the institution?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm sure there'll be a lot of them. Even at 27 years old, I'd lived a pretty precarious life. And when I was in Colorado, I was around a lot of outlaw bikers. And somehow I was, I don't want to say smart enough. I was wise enough at the time to not be involved with them as in a prospect in a club or something. But I was affiliated with several different clubs and never really wanted to be involved in that because it wasn't my thing. But so prison to me wasn't that much different of I don't want to be involved with, there were outlaw criminals and they wanted you to either be a part of that or not a part of that. And, because of Arrested Development, I went in, I had like a 17-year-old brain or something. And, I was still using. In county jail, I found that you could use, the medical to be able to stay loaded. And so, when I got to prison, my buddy and I were just discussing that as we're going on this tour here is, I found a friend is what I found. And so we were just coming in and doing this thing basically together somehow.
Okay.
And so I was a bit segregated to begin with. For some reason, they thought that I was a bad guy. And the 17 violent felonies that they read off from a piece of paper led them, I can't remember what, I keep on wanting to say Spurlaws or something, but one of the intake officers was a big guy. And when they brought me into intake in Unit 7 on the yard, he said, "I thought you guys were bringing in a monster. Why'd you bring in this little guy?" And so, there were a lot of challenges in that beginning, but a lot of that was I was just really segregated to begin with.
Okay.
I didn't go out to the dog cages with anybody else. I went out by myself. If I was escorted someplace, they shut down everything, and 2 people escorted me, and until I got to Max, and which was some 25 days later or something.
Okay.
So I didn't stay in Unit 7 for very long.
Okay. And then you went to Max. How long were you at Max?
A year and a half, I think.
Okay.
And so that process takes place it's a whole, I did 11 months in county jail, and so I saw a whole bunch of what that stuff was. The hierarchy, all that chicken packing kind of stuff. And so, I don't know. I mean, as a chameleon, you just, try to fit in wherever you get in. Or get in where you fit in. So it was, I can't say as any one person, had any kind of influence as far as that goes in the beginning. Short of having a true friend that, most of the time people thought that he was me and I was him. And so they had just put mail down on the table or a commissary. And so, that was kind of nice because I was kind of hoping he'd get beat up for my stuff. And, but I don't know if that ever happened.
And so after your year in Max, were you in total lockdown, just still?
No, in the
Oh.
beginning, when Max just opened up, it was single cells, and,
Okay.
like the bottom tier would get let out into the day room for half of the day or something, and then the upstairs, so then you'd be locked down. But, I mean, a lot of push-ups, a lot of playing cards, a lot of walking in circles.
Yeah. Where'd you go after Max? And how did you get to move on from there?
I guess fortunately for me is that on a Rule 35, I had 70-some years taken off from my sentence. It was stacked pretty deep to begin with 120 years fixed. And so they weren't going to let me go anywhere. And then I think 73 years were basically consolidated in Rule 35. And so then I think I had 47 years fixed at that time. So basically, some sort of petition was going around about medium security inmates being in maximum security, and so they sent me over to the yard, which is ISCI,
Okay.
in 1991.
What goes through your brain when you have 120 years and then 70 years like these sentences?
Well, what went through my brain was a lot of squawky and a lot of marijuana and anything I could get my hands on. Because at 28, 29 years old or something at that time, and 120 years fixed, and I kept, I did drop out from high school in the 11th grade, but I knew math well enough to know that meant I wasn't getting out of prison.
Yeah.
And so it didn't matter how I manipulated the numbers, it just didn't work out. And so I tell that story quite frequently about, having 120 years fixed, 29 years old, and, dipping Squawky out of a garbage bag. That was my solution to life.
Yeah.
And it was a clean garbage bag, just so
I was
everybody
going to
knows.
say, what was your primary squawking? Were you making the squawky or was somebody
No,
else?
the interesting thing is that I've never made Squawky. I've never made a tattoo gun, never gotten a tattoo, never made a shank.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, I'm what they call a puss bag. Yeah, I just didn't participate in that. I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody else was doing it, I'd, indulge in whatever they were doing, but I never brought contraband. I've just never really been involved in that thing.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I also grew up in a culture that you didn't get tattoos and you didn't use needles and you didn't, drink with barbiturates. And so I got to be careful. Just the word barbiturate gets me in trouble quite a bit.
Oh, how so? Sorry.
There used to be a joke about barbitch.
Oh.
Too soon.
That's not where I was thinking I was going.
I know. I just got to be careful about this.
All right. So you feel like you navigated your first year just laying low, being chameleon?
No,
just
I
kinda
got in
blending
a lot of fights.
Yo, you
and,
did?
Yeah.
Oh.
I didn't. Did I leave that part out? I never had a shank. I never participated in that other stuff. But in that pecking order and being a little maybe undersized, a lot of people would like to try to find out what you're made of, and I have a pretty big mouth as far as talking shit. And so I may have instigated a couple of them.
All right.
And I'm sorry.
Just fists? just throwing down, huh?
Yeah. And I apologize for that because I really wasn't sorry, and I said it anyway. But there were people that wanted, you have, I think, I don't know for sure, but you kind of sort of have to figure out where you're going to draw the line and what you're going to take and what you're not going to take. And, unfortunately, I've never had a problem fighting. And so that is an addiction. And I'm glad I'm in recovery.
If you're comfortable, when was the last fight you had?
That was probably 1991.
Okay, so just a
Yeah.
couple years in. All right.
Yep.
Wow.
I took a
Jeez.
lot of shit.
I was gonna say, did you win it or?
Oh, all the fights that I've been
Yeah,
in,
you're
yeah,
pretty scrappy.
absolutely. It's the ones where you're not willing to fight and you get punched in the face and you
Yeah.
don't fight. Those are the hard ones.
Is
Or you get slapped across the face, and
yeah.
I won't say bitch slapped because I've never been bitch slapped, but that's a whole lot worse than fighting. And so,
Yeah, yeah.
but somewhere in there, I had this thing in my head that I wasn't going to be there. I wasn't going to be one of those guys that were going to be there forever.
Just gonna take it. Yeah.
Just like the outlaw criminal or that convict thing just did not fit for me. I did not want to be that guy.
Yeah.
And so I can't tell you why. Just like I didn't want to be an outlaw biker and be in a gang and wash somebody else's bike. If I was going to wash a bike, I'm going to wash my own. Jay-Z.
How often did you experience violence in there? Like both just,
Yeah, about 4 days before I got out, I was threatened with an ink pen and I won't say every day,
yeah.
but it's pretty prevalent.
Man.
I mean, it's the nature of the beast. If you lock up a bunch of criminals without, living skills, we use coping mechanisms if we haven't overcome that. So,
Do you feel like you hit a turning point after that fight in around 92? And did you join a program or anything? Or? No.
way too soon.
No?
You gotta slow
Okay.
down. Way too soon. I used drugs and alcohol for the first 4 years.
Okay.
I didn't get into recovery until 1993.
Oh, and what urged you into that?
Well, now we're going to bring up Mark Gornick.
Okay.
So I knew at some point I was going to mention his name. So, I went to one of the cool things about institutions is that 12-step programs have hospitals and institutions, and I'm not sure what they're called now, but AA meetings and NA meetings. Even when I was in county jail, in order to get off from the pod, I would go to AA meetings.
Okay.
Not because I had a problem, but everybody else did.
Yeah.
And so when I was in Max, I actually met Jack Krieger was a NA volunteer, no anonymity here, and Mark Gornick was an AA volunteer, Alcoholics Anonymous volunteer.
From the outside coming in?
They
to the
were
institution?
from the outside, and they were coming into the institution, and so, unfortunately, I could not relate with NA. They would talk about shooting heroin and being heroin addicts, and I never did heroin. I never used needles, and they were all old, and so I was young, and so. Not you, Jack. I mean everybody else. And, Mark, bottom of the barrel kind of alcoholics and stuff, and I just could not relate with that. I had put in my head that, a junkie was, in a dark alley, with a needle in their arm or something, and so that wasn't me.
Yeah.
I could snort 8 grams of cocaine a day and not be a junkie. And so it's pretty convenient.
Yeah.
And the alcoholic is standing in front of a burn barrel, with MD 2020 in a brown bag, and that's not me. And so I grew out of that, like at 14 or something. We gave up that mad dog. And so then I wasn't an alcoholic, and I wasn't a drug addict, and I wasn't a criminal. So it worked out really good.
Yeah.
Denial, baby, denial.
So, what were these first meetings? When did it start to help you or take hold, or do you feel like it did?
Nope.
No.
Not even today. As long as I just drink on the weekends, everything's good. I kid. Again, I will go back to Mark. interestingly enough, became the program, IDOC hired him to be the program manager at the yard, and so ISCI. And so, unfortunate for me, when I would walk to Correctional Industries in the morning to go to work, he would be coming in the front gate to go to work as a program manager.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if he didn't time that in order to do that, but when you have a cop like Butch come up to you with everybody around, that's a civilian. That means they're a cop. And so, you know, he'd stop me and go, "Hey man, we got some programs going over here. There's, you know, you should come over and check them out." And I'm like, oh yeah, I will. But, you know, that guy was persistent.
Yeah.
And so, you know, finally I kind of got tired of that. And so I went, you know, I was a cheating bastard. And so because I worked at Correctional Industries, I couldn't get time off to go to programs. And, but they had a night class that was 20 hours instead of 30 hours.
Okay.
But yet you still got a 30-hour certificate. Because when I go to the parole board in 45 years, I'm going to take a wheelbarrow load of certificates with me to go there.
I think you sent me the document. I'm still downloading it.
Yeah. Well, now you don't have to have a wheelbarrow. But, you know, the beauty of it is that I actually signed up for that night class, and I took that class, and, you know, halfway through, and that was pretty profound to me, because I don't know how far you want to get into this. This is like a 4-hour interview, right?
I think everybody's in for it, yeah.
And
there's enough food back there.
Wherever I was, I don't know where I was, but halfway through that whole Vision alcohol drug education program, which was also Whole Vision training of trainers developmental program to turn inmates into counselors. And so inmates were presenting the information. And so it wasn't a staff member. And so they were wearing the same color shirt that I was. They had their name on it, and they didn't work at a gas station. You got to be old enough to remember that. And so about halfway through that education program, I realized that I was lacking education. I knew nothing about disease concept or addiction cycle or anything that they were talking about. I didn't understand. I didn't get it, but they presented it in a way to where I said, I need more of whatever this is. Okay. And so I would say, I keep on saying fortunately and unfortunately, but most of it is unfortunate, is that I signed up for Thinking Errors Orientation, and which was another 30-hour program.
That you did in 20?
No.
Oh.
I did the full 30 on this one, man. Right. And so one of the unfortunate parts was Mark Gornick was the presenter. And, you know, about, I don't know, week, 3-4 days into it or something like that, I was being my usual smart-ass self. And my friend here went through it with me, huh? And Mark said, I'm sure that what you have to say is more important than what I'm talking about. And so then what I'd like for you to do is come and present this model tomorrow. And so I had a bit of a phobia of being in front of people. And so didn't sleep that much that night, came in the next day and had to actually stand up in front of everybody and, you know, muddle my way through some sort of presentation of whatever that model was. But I will say that that guy, Mark Gornick, was pivotal in caring more about me than I cared about myself. Yeah. And relentless, didn't give up. And so I actually got a certificate for Thinking Errors Orientation. And I believe that he invited me to the very first process group, Thinking Errors process group, that maybe an hour a day or something like that. And so then it turned into, he would tell it differently than I do, but he's not here to defend himself, so I'm going to just fabricate the story all I want. He suggested that I become a facilitator for Whole Vision. And my position at Correctional Industries, the shop was closing. I like to say that I was making about $230 a month through the PIE program at Correctional Industries.
What's PIE stand for?
Chad? Prison Industries, something, I'm not exactly sure. It's PIE program.
Okay.
Did I wake you up, buddy? I didn't mean to wake you up, man.
And can you just briefly explain Correctional Industries too, just so folks know what that is?
Idaho Correctional Industries has 5 or 6 different departments of furniture shop, upholstery shop, metal shop, license plates, tagline. Tyler, could you explain? The funny thing is that I look out here in this audience and I see nothing but correctional staff and criminals everywhere. So, and for those of you that aren't, nothing personal. Correctional Industries, I believe, is it's an incredible program, and now, in the last 5 years or however long, whenever it became a training program, you can receive through the U.S. Department of Labor apprenticeships.
Oh wow! Okay.
And so.
And was the pay pretty good in CI?
In the PIE program, it was actually minimum wage back in 1992 or something when I worked there.
Okay.
That job was, they closed that shop, and so basically it turned into me going to Whole Vision as a trainee for free. You didn't get paid until a $10 a month slot opened up.
Gotcha.
And so I don't want to fast forward that far, but so I started going to, that was my assignment, I guess.
Okay.
Moved on to C tier in Unit 10, which was a cognitive self-change residential tier.
Is that ISCI or?
ISCI, at the yard, yeah.
In the yard, okay.
And so worked at Whole Vision, which was treatment services at the time, and lived on the tier. So you got a lot of treatment. Mm-hmm. And went to 2 process groups a month, or 2 process groups a week. Oh, wow. Daily thinking reports, daily journal entries. But again, unfortunately, when you were a trainee in Whole Vision, that meant that any issues were up on Mark had it set up to where there were 2 chalkboards on the front of the room.
Okay.
And we spent most of our days up there writing thinking reports on the board.
In front of everybody, like?
Yeah, all the rest of basically there were between 8 and 12 inmate trainees at the time at different levels, different stages. So.
Okay. And so these are personal reports. You're talking about your own individual problems or things that
No, you're
seeing?
talking about what's going on in your head right now.
Gotcha. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not, you don't get to do, yeah.
Not enough.
It's the
big
real
enough word
deal
for that.
where, yeah. Yeah, any kind of sanitizing or any of that stuff that doesn't work out very good for you. So, great process.
Yeah.
Owe my life to it. And so, yeah, I mean, Mark was the person, he was my change agent, my boss, my sponsor in 12 Steps in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so that was probably the biggest turning point right there of, you know, actually going to an AA meeting where, you know, he was the chairperson, if you will, for that big book study meeting. Okay. And so it was the kind of meeting where the group conscience was, if you're not actively working the steps out of the big book with a sponsor, confine your comments to questions. And for self-absorbed junkie, that wasn't very cool. Didn't like it.
Right.
I had a lot to say. Really important shit. And yeah, they had a tendency of putting you in your spot. Mm-hmm. Didn't really want to hear what you had to say because all you had to say was their first step. And so it really started to take effect between working the steps. And one of the mandatory requirements for the whole vision program was that you had to be working a 12-step program with a sponsor. Mm-hmm. Living on the residential tier, doing all the requirements for the training of trainers developmental program. So any one of those would have been enough to kill a billy goat. Yeah. And so me being the junkie I am, I decided to do all three.
Nice. All right.
But you know, people like Woody and Kelly and Scott, you know, there were other people that were doing the same thing. So, you know, if Jay-Z wasn't such a big deal, he'd have been doing the same thing. So, see, anonymity right there, man.
So when did you get into the hobby crafts, into that shop at ICI?
That was one of the first things that I did.
You did? Okay.
When I got there in 1991, I found out who had all the drugs, and they were in the hobby shop, and so.
Wow.
Well, sorry, you guys, there won't be a hobby shop from here on out.
I was gonna say, is he still there?
Just kidding. Yeah, and so, you know, it was, you know, back then there were 800 inmates on the yard, probably convicts then, right? They were convicts in 1992. Yeah. So, you know, the hobby officer wasn't that strict about having people come in and, you know, as long as it was, you know, quiet. Yeah. And so I basically, back then, they were building belt buckles. Mm-hmm. There was leather work, metal belt buckles, different things like that. Metal, wood, leather, probably horsehair. Yeah. So I just started cutting buckles for the infamous Doug Morris and slave labor. And
was this? Did you get paid in drugs by doing this, or any way that you got paid?
There was, I can't remember what it was, but there was some sort of a deal where, you know, like every 2 buckle blanks that I cut out or something, I could cut out one for myself or something like that. And so you basically are doing a lot of, you know, hand cutting on metal and learning how to do that and breaking a lot of the other guy's blades. And so, yeah, that was basically it. And of course there was a waiting list to be able to get a locker. Mm-hmm. There had to be an empty locker, next person on the list, you know, so you have to just wait your turn to get in. And so eventually I got in and started buying my own supplies and but yeah, there's drugs everywhere, and so that's not really the point behind that, I guess. But
what would you do when you completed it? Did you send it to family? Were they selling it or anything, or? Yeah,
I mean, usually that's what you try to do. You know, to begin with, most of your hobby craft is gifts that, I mean, it's like the stuff that you gave to your mom in the 3rd grade. a lot like that.
Yeah.
I doubt anybody hung them on the refrigerator, but the idea is to try to send them out to people to get them sold, to get money so that you can resupply. And, I always thought that if, hobbycraft didn't support itself, then it wasn't much of a hobby.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's continued to do drugs and drink and, go through all of that stuff, so.
Man. Yeah. Did you take money from Correctional Industries? Could you use the money that you made from that to pay for hobbycraft items?
Mhm.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, that's how I bought most of my tools to get started, was through Correctional Industries, yeah.
Did a lot of the skills you learned in Correctional Industries translate into your hobbycrafts too? Did you transport them?
Not really, no.
Okay.
In the early years, there was a lot of transporting from Correctional Industries into the hobby shop. But it's on a different, furniture is quite a bit different than the
little crafts.
than the meticulous, work on a jewelry box or something.
That's right.
Basically, the saws, the equipment is kind of similar, but yeah, doesn't really equate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of shifting. Did you work with any religious organizations? Did you ever find God while you were inside, or?
No, he has continued to elude me today.
I'm just really curious of how often you saw that happening.
Well, I'm a jailhouse conversion. Shortly after, my story's so backwards, it's just bizarre, but since you bring it up, I can talk about it. When I still lived up north, before I went to Colorado one of the last times, before I lost my mind and went to Colorado on another geographical escape, I always had a friend that lived in Bonners Ferry that he preached. If he was awake, he was preaching. Excuse me, but he had a tendency of drinking a lot of tequila and smoking a lot of marijuana while he was preaching.
Okay.
And so it made it real difficult for me to understand that connection. But I don't know how far into that story I want to go to protect the innocent or not innocent. So at any rate, my two friends and I were at my house at the base of Schweitzer Mountain doing mass quantities of cocaine, and had been up for 2 or 3 days. And we called it fun. And so we just came to the end of, 3 dumbasses sitting around snorting cocaine. And he said, let's invite the Holy Spirit in. And I keep on saying weird, but interesting thing is that I was 100% swept clean and sober. And that was a pretty profound experience for me.
Interesting.
Quite backwards, I think. I don't know. I'm non-traditional in a lot of ways. But I was sober. Mm-hmm. And I was going through custody battle with my ex-wife over my kids, and it was, the judge at the time was 100% for my wife and ex-wife, and 100% against me. Mm-hmm. And so, my buddy Michael said, let's pray and let's ask the Holy Spirit to invite the Holy Spirit in. And he prayed that, that God would change the things. And that was like Saturday morning or something. I don't know how you tell night from day, but Monday morning I was going back to court, which is what prompted that prayer. And so Monday I went into court, and it was just bizarre that, the judge did a 100 reversal. And I'd never seen anything like that. And so, I had maybe the beginnings of some sort of faith or something, but I didn't go to church, and I didn't read a Bible, and I had nothing to go on.
Gotcha.
And continued to snort up to 8 grams of cocaine a day. And so psychologically, I was not doing well. And I never blamed the cocaine for that. My friend. And so in that geographical escape to Colorado, at any rate, I got a lot worse. And so fast forwarding to when I was when I got arrested and I was in a condemned jail in Sandpoint, Bonner County, I was in a cell by myself way too much. And another friend of mine had a Bible sent in. And so I started reading, and I'm a prove it kind of guy, and I just said, you got to prove it. Yeah. And so, I was talking to Jesus. And so, they moved me downstairs to a 4-man tank, which I found to be pretty interesting, since I couldn't shower. I couldn't do anything with anybody else. They made a point of, I think it was 9 days at that point without a shower. 9 days of having a tray slid in and a tray slid out, and that was it. And so then they moved me downstairs, and so it was just a bizarre, I don't need to spend too much time on this, but it was just a bizarre incident where the prosecutor pulled one of the guys out, and questioned him and wanted him to turn state's evidence on me because of the conversations. And I realized that as soon as he was called out. And so that was a prove-it moment. And so I just tried to have some sort of a relationship reading the Bible, and, called myself a Christian. But unfortunately, when I was in Max, I would do Bible correspondence courses and all of this, religious activity, and still smoke marijuana, drink squawky, continue that kind of lifestyle. Gotcha. Like I wanted to want something different, but didn't know how. Yeah. And so, it all kind of sort of started coming together. And I think, one of the things that I usually tell is that I was in the sanctuary at the pulpit preaching a sermon, sorry about that, at the yard, and 5 minutes later, I walked from there to the gym, into the hobby shop, and I was snorting cocaine for the rest of the day. Jeez. And I could not understand how that takes place. And so that was one of the benefits of 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, cognitive restructuring, and addictions recovery. As soon as all of those started to come together, and I had quite a battle there too, of a higher power, all these different sorts of things. And so that's why I say the first few years or whatever, there was a struggle in there about how do you piece all of this together. And so fortunately all of it started to come together, and a lot of other people put in a lot more work than I did. The Dave Oglesbys, the Mark Gornicks, the Butch Shotwells, Bob Barnett's. I could go down the list of people, that correctional officers, wardens. You look back on it, I look back on it, and I say there was a pivotal person at every single juncture. Yeah. And so maybe they knew, maybe they didn't know, but that's the influence that we have on each other. And so I think that it all just started to come together, and even today, my faith is part of my recovery, and I still don't know what I'm doing, so I don't have a plan.
Yeah, lifelong practice there.
Yeah, well, I mean, my buddy asked me when he came in, "How you doing? Are you doing good?" And I'm like, I still don't know how to answer that question.
Right.
I don't know. I don't drink. I don't use drugs. I try to do the next right thing, but I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, day to day.
Yeah.
Talking about more kind of the culture that you witnessed while you were incarcerated, was there any music being made, art being made that you saw that you were impressed by or moved by?
Well, there's so much potential in prison that it's ridiculous. The amount of I mean, there's people that can draw like you wouldn't believe, and artists in every form and fashion, from guitarists to there's no shortage of potential in prison. Almost anything that people, from paper folding, I mean, it's
roses and everything on
there
it.
is no shortage of ingenuity, and for criminal purposes and for outlets for therapeutic purposes. So it's crazy. Yeah, the amount of musicians, and I mean, there's some talent.
Were there any opportunities to like record or do anything like that, or perform in front of everybody?
Yeah, the chapel actually was pretty involved in even open mic. Some Friday nights there was a lot of I don't know if you want to call them concerts or not, but musical events, and
Yeah, we had a lot of that here at this institution, a lot of photos of both bands that were of the men here and outside bands that would come and perform. And did you ever have outside performers come in?
They would use the gym. There used to be a volunteer appreciation day. That was before Chad got involved in I'm kidding. Volunteer Appreciation Day was really a pretty big deal, because there were a lot of times it was some people would come in. It used to be there would be softball teams that would come in from the streets. There were volleyball teams that came in. There used to be basketball teams that would come in and play, and I've played volleyball and softball, fast pitch with people from the community. And that is another it's underappreciated as far as the impact of being able to play sports with people from the community, because it gives you a few minutes of feeling like you get to be with people in the community.
Yeah.
And so very much like volunteers, very much like staff members that go out of their way to, I don't know, maybe use the word make you feel more like a human being or something, not a second-class citizen.
Right.
None of them are here today, but all the good ones are someplace else. You really gonna look at me like that, buddy?
What do you think was the biggest change that you saw at IDOC between 1989 and 2022, 2021? Population trends, were people coming in for certain crimes?
Me not using drugs and alcohol anymore.
Yeah. Were there any new philosophies, new sets of rules that you had to live by? Anything that changed dramatically? Or?
I don't know about dramatically.
Okay.
I heard one staff member in a pretty high up position one time say that it takes a long time to turn a, what do you call the ships that are aircraft carrier?
Oh,
Takes a
yeah.
long time. I have a GED from prison, so don't laugh. Takes a long time to turn an aircraft carrier around.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't say is necessarily drastic.
Yeah.
I know that when I was in Texas, out of state transfer,
Mm-hmm.
somebody said that Olivia Craven had retired from the parole board, and we laughed because that was supposed to take place for about 20 years. And then somebody said that there was a memo where you didn't have to be clean shaven anymore and you could grow a beard, and we all laughed. And so I wouldn't say, there's not a lot of overnight stuff that takes place in IDOC as far as that goes.
Yeah.
It's, and a lot of times by the time it makes it down to, you know, below ground level, it's already been implemented, whatever's going on.
Yeah.
I think more of, you see the pendulum, and we used to talk about it early on in the treatment field. You know, the pendulum used to swing to, everybody was about teaching people trades, criminal inmates, whatever you want to call them, residents. Teach them trades, and then they'll be able to actually get out and make a living and be a productive member of society. And unfortunately, a big portion of that is that you just have criminals that have skills. And then the pendulum swings way back to the other side where it's all about treatment. And then you have a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of education and treatment, but they can't get a job.
Yeah.
And so, and you know, there's a lot of, and you know, really Chad has his thumb on the pulse of that part of stuff, which was really cool about watching his video. Yeah. And I think that it's really a difficult thing, and again, you know, I can get on a soapbox at any point in time, and I just don't believe in corrections personally, from the Quakers in, you know, stocks and chains or whatever. You know, even the philosophies to me are really difficult to understand, in the sense of, I was thinking about that on the way here today about, and I can't even remember what they're called, but there's 4 principles of incarceration or something, and one of them is deterrent and restitution and rehabilitation. And anybody got any lawyers in the room? Not jailhouse lawyers. But you know, the thing is that the people that come up with a lot of this stuff are healthy, self-adjusting people, and they're trying to do something for, you know, correction for people that don't think like that.
Yeah.
Like, I looked at it for years. Criminal punishment, and I don't know if this is the question, but that's a soapbox I'm getting on. The criminal punishment of deterrent is that I understood a long time ago that the deterrent only works for people that can be deterred. For people that have criminal personality disorder, we have these wonderful things called thinking errors, and you know, I don't need to do the numbers, but corrosion and cutoff means that you corrode to the point to where you cut off the consequences.
Gotcha.
So then there is no deterrent. So incarceration is not a deterrent. It's kind of like when I was in high school, we walked by a shed and it had a padlock on the door of all the sports equipment, and you know, the coach said, "Hey, do you know why it locks on that door?" And I said, "Well, of course, it's to keep people from stealing stuff." He says, "No, it's to keep the honest people honest." And so that's what corrections is that corrections helps keep the honest people honest, but it doesn't do anything for the criminals.
Yeah.
Because criminals are going to find a way to be criminals. And so in that sense that's why I believe so much in inmate facilitation, and you know, the vision that Chad has, and I'm going to, you know, prop him up. I like dinging him as much as I can, but to me, he is the future. And that guy's got the vision to make the changes necessary to turn it from this place where we are now Because, and he even said that, is there's a lot of things here, you know, I walked in and I said, man, I realized once I showed up here that I did easy time.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I did time, when I started, there were still knuckle-dragging Neanderthal officers that were there. The staff members were about beating you down and punishing you, and like that's going to keep you from coming back or something. And so, what was the original question? Damn rabbit trails.
I do want to ask you about your interactions with correctional officers or just like administrative staff at the institution. Did you, were there any that you really liked, and were there some that you just never got along
I
with?
still don't like them today.
Yeah, yeah.
I can point them all out too. Let's start over here on the right. You know, this is one of the things that, even about this right here, remind me what the question was when we get there.
I'll try.
You know, there's a lot of people in the audience right here that are either still with the Department of Corrections or, you know, and man, I've got to stay off from that one. Several of them, those people out there, no longer work for the Department of Corrections. And some of them are my friends. You're not going to get me to cry. That made coming here, when I started hearing about who was going to show up, I started getting real nervous.
Yeah.
Because it gets real sensitive for me. You know, there, in any industry, and corrections to me is an industry, and I remember reading an article a long time ago that said that corrections is the second largest industry in Idaho and the fastest growing. And I just went, you know, as a resident, that doesn't feel very good to be considered a part of an industry. Right. And then there was the farming out of correction, you know, CCA, GEO, all of this private prison for profit. And anyway, I'm not going to get on that one either. The beauty for me is that there have been incredibly positive staff members and incredibly negative staff members in my whole journey. So, you know, I've been blessed. I've been blessed with the Randy Blades, with, you know, I can't name them. There's just too many people that have, and whether, you know, the interesting thing is that a lot of times they're not necessarily the ones that are my role model. There's a couple of them, and I'm not going to name any names, that I was able to have an impact in their lives. And so, you know, it was very mutual in the fact of the ones that I don't want to participate with, I don't participate with. And the ones that I do, I try to participate with as much as I can. And so, which I think is incredibly difficult because, again, you know, these are, some of the staff members are doing 16-hour days. And, you know, you'll spend 8 hours, and some are here from Correctional Industries where, you know, they're a direct supervisor of some 8 hours a day. And so, you know, you have a lot of interaction with a lot of people. And so, you know, a lot of them have gotten me through tough times of, you know, there's some inhumane things that take place. And I can't remember who I was sharing that with earlier, but it was not a rabbit on a rabbit trail. I was sharing with somebody about, you know, there's you know, really two types of correctional staff, and one of them is really trying to make a difference, and the other one got their lunch money taken from them and they want to punish people. And so, Fortunately, none of that second category are here today that I know of. They're probably waiting in the parking lot. And so then you navigate that. But, and I don't remember what the original question was, but, you know, there's good people everywhere.
Yeah, that's great.
And I know for a fact that Chad is really working on that part of, you know, when you're dealing with a criminal element, you're always going to have the criminal element. And so for staff member, it used to be, you know, through the academy, you know, they were really, it was beat into their head that you can't trust them, you need to watch your back, all of these sorts of things. And I'm hoping that that's changing some, because they get there, they find out, well, that's not really the case. Yeah, there's a category of people that you do have to watch out for, but there's also, in the population in IDOC, there are good people and there are unhealthy people.
Yeah.
Same as the staff.
It's everywhere. Yeah, absolutely.
Same as everywhere.
Yeah.
Just like your coworkers.
That's right.
No, I'm just kidding. Oh, she gets up.
I think we're coming close to time, but I do want to ask you about your experience of being released, and what was the first thing you did when you walked out that door?
Hugged my mom.
Nice. Yeah.
That was the first thing. Went out and got in my friend's truck, and yeah, it's all a blur.
Yeah.
That's so surreal. I mean, the first 2 or 3 months were, that's just surreal. That's the only thing that, just have to really keep on asking yourself if this is real.
Yeah. What's been the
A lot
biggest...
of bruises.
Oh, yeah.
From pinching.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it just, you know, it's a fantasy in your head.
Uh-huh.
While you're incarcerated, you have to keep one half of your brain in the here and now of, you could spend the rest of your life in prison and this is as good as it's going to get. And so the other half of your brain is constantly trying to go to fantasy land about what it would be like when you get out.
Yeah.
I'll just share with you, it's nothing like the fantasy.
In a good way, a bad way?
Both.
Both. Yeah.
You know, I never thought that I'd be, you know, for one, I never thought that I'd meet the infamous Jay-Z that was such a big deal, and then ride Harley Davidsons with him in some, you know, cool places or whatever. It's like, and those are the experiences, you know, being able to go to an AA meeting with Butch or something, or, you know, and go through the line, you know, being able to participate with, you know, I've met a lot of these people out here that are just my brothers and friends and sisters, and, you know, there's some that I did time with, and they're out here. And still, you know, I see Cope, and it's like, man, I remember doing time with him at ICC, and it's like, it hurts your brain sometimes to, you know, I mean, I met you, and I said, yeah, it's under different circumstances, and it's like, it's just bizarre to go from there, you know, to here.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that you're going to let me leave, but... By the way, who's in charge of this?
Interview's going all right. Yeah.
I came with Chad. Everybody know that?
Were there any things in society that you were just like, what is that?
It's a foreign country.
Yeah?
And so, you know, I was here in 1980 in Boise before I was incarcerated, and, you know, all of that stuff west was prairie. And so, and I've been on transports to medical and different things like that, and I go, well, this wasn't here.
Right.
And so, fortunately, I've had enough exposure with, you know, I've been to, you know, Orofino and Minnesota, New Mexico, 2 places in Texas. So I've been on airplanes, you know, I've been on buses. I've seen some different things that have kind of helped me in part of that, but I don't, you know, one of the things that I've never heard anything about is the grieving process of leaving prison.
Interesting.
Never heard anybody talk about that.
Yeah.
And so that has been one of the major struggles that I've had.
Yeah.
day one, I went to my friend's house. I had real food at a real table. All of that. My mom was there. My sister was there. My best friend. All of this stuff. You just can't get that into your brain. I mean, it literally took 3 to 6 months or something to realize that this thing was real.
Yeah.
And in that time, you're trying to navigate of trying to get a driver's license. And I didn't come out here to, the Boise area or something where there's a lot of reentry. There's really a lot of support here, just like the recovery network that's here.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's phenomenal here. And I went to Colorado where, they just said, don't leave Colorado. That's all they said. As far as parole,
Yeah.
Pay $10 a month for cost of supervision and don't leave Colorado. And so I said, what district am I supposed to be in? And he looked at me and he said, don't leave Colorado. I said, Colorado's a big state.
Yeah.
So, there's I went to Walmart, all of these things. But, part of this is that I got the best friends in the world.
Yeah.
And that has made this transition possible, is that I've had people listen to my whining and moaning and bitching and complaining about, that this is not necessarily hard, but when you've lived in a box for the majority of your life, and then all those walls come down, and then you're free. I walked out of a Maverick at 9 o'clock at night in September, and the doors opened for me, and I walked out, and I had paid for the merchandise. That was the new one, just so you know. And I walked out, and I just started crying.
Yeah.
Right there on the
Wow.
on the sidewalk of Maverick, because it was like, this thing is real. And so I don't know how you can be prepared for it, but I really think one of the key factors is having the people out here be able to go back there and share that,
Yeah.
because that is lacking.
Yeah. Interesting. That's
Yeah.
a fascinating grieving process of.
Well, and no one, I don't
Yeah.
know of anybody who has ever explained it or talked about it or anything,
Yeah.
but I have money in the bank, and I'm riding a $20,000 Harley Davidson around Boise on a beautiful sunny day, and I don't have a care in the world, except I've got a pit in my stomach that's eating me up. And I can't understand why that is.
Yeah.
And so I left a lot of friends there, staff, and I'm okay with saying that I have friends that are staff. I'm hoping that at some point that's going to change to where you can actually have friends that work for the Department of Corrections.
Right. Yeah.
Because they have the most influence over the population than anybody. And so there are relationships that are built there that once you're out of there, you can't have anymore.
Yeah.
And so, fraternization, and there's good reason for that, but there's got to be some sort of area in there that can be, navigated. Because I have really dear friends here right now that I think Chad is maybe the only one that's still with the department, but the other ones are a lot smarter. They got out. I kid.
I just have a couple more. Are there any habits or routines that you still find yourself
Nope,
doing?
not a one.
No? Yeah? Yeah? No,
If you weren't OCD before you went to prison,
Right.
you're OCD when you leave.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's, good and bad both. And I've shared this with people inside and outside, because I still have communication with people that are never going to get out of prison.
Yeah.
And I understand it with them because they're living vicariously. I send pictures to them, do videos, and send it to them. And, I ride my motorcycle and take a video or something. And, I've ridden out to the gates of, the complex and have that in the back of a picture with me out there on my motorcycle or something and saying, hey, man, because I used to be on that yard listening to Harleys taking off,
Right.
and going, man, someday I want to be that dude.
Jeez.
And so today I am, but, there's coping mechanisms that I learned in adolescence that helped me to cope, but I did not develop living skills.
Yeah.
And so those coping mechanisms are incredibly unhealthy, and that's addiction and all the stuff that's involved with coping mechanisms. And so the first 27 years of my life I can't utilize now.
Right.
In the sense that that was coping mechanisms and just dumbass junkie. And so I can't utilize those today because they don't work. And so I have 29 years worth of living skills and spiritual principles that I've developed over the years, but how do you use them out here versus in there? Yeah. In there I had everything, you know, I knew what I was doing. You know, I always joke with staff when they come in with a handbook and they say, well, in this handbook, and I said, you realize I wrote that handbook, right? And so I said, why don't you just tell me what you want and just take it? Yeah. And let's forego the whole handbook crap, because I don't really want to participate in that. The rules are whatever you say they are. Because they like to say, well, you've been here long enough to know the rules. And I'm like, are you even serious? Do you hear what you're saying? You were in the 3rd grade when I got here. And so, you know, and there's, you know, we're back on that again, but there's some staff members that want to come in and take your KOPs, which is medication that you got from, you know, the medical department, with your $2 copay, and because it says expired, they want to take it. And I said, well, that's when it was issued. That's not, if you read down here, that's when it's really expired, the medication is. And they're looking at the wrong one, and they want to take it. And I go ahead and take all of it. I'll just go down and get more. You're the one paying for it. You're the taxpayer. And then they go, never mind. And so there's a lot of that stuff about, I know how to function in prison, but I don't know how to function out here, because translating from there to here is, you know, there's a lot of moving parts out here.
Right.
Car insurance. There's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of it people don't ever even think about. I was sharing this with a lady the other day, and she said, 90% of us don't know what the hell we're doing. And I said, 90% of you don't know what the hell you're doing out here where you've lived your whole life. There's about me % that doesn't know how to do that out here. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that are completely different. Yeah. Like my head will still have me incarcerated. Like I think that I can't actually give, you know, that guy a hug over there because he's a staff member. Well, I'm not there anymore, and neither are they. And so there's just things that, you know, I believe in PTSD, and so I think that there's things, good habits, bad habits, whatever that is, you know. Yeah. I think you have to navigate your way through every single bit of that out here. Yeah. Which I'm no more of a victim than anybody else. I just think it's different. You know, I still put on my pants both legs at a time.
Well, I think just to end with what you're doing right now with yourself, you know, how are you staying busy?
Wish I knew.
Yeah?
I took a job. I was in construction for 10, 11 months or something, and at 45 years old, I'm just starting to get old, and so.
45, huh?
Yeah. Got out of construction, and I just don't want to do it. I especially don't want to do it in the winter, and so I took a job at Builders First Source, and trying to learn how to be some sort of a salesman, which I've never been. I mean, I sold drugs. I was a salesman, right?
I think those sell themselves mostly.
Boom, see? So the good news is lumber does too. Building supplies do also, but just trying to navigate, trying to show up every day and, you know, figure out what it is that I'm going to do next. Nice. Because I literally don't have a plan, and so.
Man, well, I wish you luck.
Well, thank you, because I need every bit I can get.
Well, folks, thank you all so much for coming. Joe, thank you so much for talking about your time, and yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.